Winter 1943. On the frozen banks of the Volga River, the city of Stalingrad has become a grave. What began as a blitzkrieg of confidence has collapsed into house-to-house butchery, street by street, floor by floor, room by room. The German Sixth Army, once the pride of Hitler's war machine, is surrounded, starving, freezing, waiting for an order to surrender that Berlin refuses to give. For the first time since the war began, the invincible German army is not advancing. It is dying slowly in the snow. Asterisk on February 2, 1943, Field Marshal Friedrich Paulus does what Hitler forbade. He surrenders. 91,000 starving German soldiers, many barely able to walk, are marched into Soviet captivity. It is the single greatest military catastrophe in German history, and back in Berlin, the propaganda machine scrambles to spin annihilation into legend. But the illusion is broken. For the first time, ordinary Germans begin to whisper a question they were never allowed to ask. Can we actually lose this war? By the summer of 1943, Hitler stakes everything on one final offensive gambit, Operation Citadel. Aimed at the Soviet salient around Kursk, it becomes the largest tank battle in human history. A thundering collision of steel and fire across the open steppe. But Soviet intelligence has read the plan in advance. The trap meant to encircle the Red Army instead grinds the German war machine down to scrap metal. After Kursk, the Wehrmacht will never again mount a major offensive in the east. From this point forward, there is only retreat. Asterisk while the army bleeds out in the east, the war comes home. Allied bombers darken the skies over German cities night after night, Hamburg, Cologne, and eventually Berlin itself, turning entire neighborhoods into firestorms that consume oxygen and lives alike. Civilians, once fed a diet of victory newsreels, now huddle in basements, listening to the drone of engines overhead, wondering if their street will still exist by morning. The war Hitler promised would never touch German soil is now falling from the sky onto German children. Asterisk. June 6, 1944. On the beaches of Normandy, thousands of Allied soldiers storm ashore under a wall of gunfire, opening the long-promised Second Front. Hitler, now fighting a two-front war he always feared, refuses to believe the invasion is real for the first critical hours, a hesitation that will cost Germany the initiative in the West forever. The noose that began tightening in the snows of Stalingrad now has a second hand closing from the coast of France. Asterisk, by late 1944, the war has turned entirely against Germany. Hitler retreats from public view into a reinforced bunker beneath the Reich Chancellery in Berlin, a concrete tomb lit by electric bulbs, disconnected from the reality, unraveling above ground. Maps on the walls show divisions that no longer exist, being pushed by a general staff too afraid to tell him the truth. As Soviet and Allied armies close in from east and west, the architect of the Reich begins issuing orders to armies that have already been destroyed. Asterisk from the east. The Red Army advances like an unstoppable tide. Operation Bagration alone destroys an entire German army group in weeks. One of the most catastrophic defeats in military history. Soviet soldiers, hardened by years of brutal fighting and driven by a desire for vengeance after the horrors inflicted on their homeland, roll relentlessly toward the German border. Refugees flee west by the millions, terror ahead of them and behind them, caught between two collapsing worlds. Asterisk. As the front collapses, Germany scrapes the bottom of what remains. Boys as young as 12 and old men well past fighting age are handed rifles and armbands and sent to defend a capital that professional armies could no longer hold. The Volkssturm, Hitler's last militia, marches not to victory, but to slow an ending that has already been decided. Mothers watch their sons leave for a front that no longer has a rear. Asterisk by April 1945, Berlin is surrounded. Soviet artillery rains down on the city day and night. turning the once grand capital of the Reich into a landscape of craters and burning rubble. Fighting devolves into brutal, close-quarters combat, building by building, cellar by cellar, fought not by professional soldiers alone, but by boys, old men, and the desperate remnants of a shattered army. The city that once hosted triumphant military parades now hosts its own execution. Asterisk underground, the delusion finally cracks. Hitler, pale and trembling, rages at generals for disobeying orders given to armies that no longer exist. Loyal aides marry, celebrate, and mourn within meters of each other in the same suffocating concrete rooms, aware that the end is now measured in days, not months. On April 30th, 1945, as Soviet soldiers fight within blocks of the Chancellery, Adolf Hitler takes his own life. The architect of a war that killed tens of millions dies not on a battlefield, but hiding beneath the rubble of the city he swore would never fall. Asterisk days later, Soviet soldiers raise their flag over the shattered dome of the Reichstag, the smoke of a burning Berlin curling around them. The war in Europe, which began with tanks rolling into Poland 6 years earlier, ends in the basement of the very city that started it. On May 8, 1945, Germany formally surrenders. What is left is not a nation, but rubble, grief, and a reckoning that will define the rest of the century, the terrible arithmetic of what one man's ambition cost the world.